Governor, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Good to see you, sir.
Good to
Thank
see you,
you.
buddy.
We've done this a few times before, so if we have any kind of insider jokes, I apologize for all of you. It's great to be with all of you this morning. Many people watching online as well, and want to greet you for joining us at Semafor for one of our Newsmaker series. So, Governor, let me just start out. When are you going to announce?
Well, you gotta.
I think I interviewed you about a year and a half ago. I happened to be at the Hill then, and you said, "Steve, I'm going to do it. I'm going to run in 20." So, have you changed your mind?
I got sober and then decided I had to make this decision thoughtfully. But we'll make a decision in the next couple of weeks. I think just the way the calendar is working politically, RNC is setting up some rules for the debates that are going to require certain milestones to be met by mid-August to qualify for the stage.
What, like milestones like name recognition?
Individual donors.
I see.
Individual donors more than anything else. So they're talking about allowing or requiring 40,000 individual donors to qualify for the stage, and so that takes a little time to do. And so if you're going to be serious about this, and I think you have to be on the stage to be serious about it, then you probably have to make a decision by May.
So how many of your good friends in the Republican Party are not running?
Plenty.
Okay.
I mean, look, this is.
I mean that facetiously, but a lot of people are lining up to look like they're running. Tim Scott, whom you know well,
right.
Asa Hutchinson, of course, is declared. Nikki Haley, of course, still out there, I think.
Yes. This looks like a vacant field compared to what I dealt with in 2016. I mean, in 2016, we had 17 candidates for the Republican nomination, and we had to have two separate debates because there were so many people. And even with the debates that I was in, there were 10 of us. It was a lot. I don't think
you were always on the main stage.
All but one time.
Oh, you were not on the main stage.
One time I got sent to the kids' table. Yes. But did really well at the kids' table. In the next debate, I was right back up to the main stage. So, yeah, I think I participated in 8 debates in 2015-16, and I was in the main debate 7 of the 8 times.
So let me ask you a serious question. There's a lot of stuff I want to get into about Florida, Mickey Mouse, things like this. But I'm really interested in a serious question. You thought about running in 2012, and you decided not to run.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you think that was a mistake. But the second thing is, really, I think anyone who wants to be this president of this country is looking largely at what are the factors and currents in the nation. I'm interested as you look back to 2012, then 2016 and 2020, and now as you're going into 2024, what are the biggest tectonic shifts that worry you as you look at potentially leading this country or trying to?
Well, first I'll answer your 2012 question. No, I have no regrets, and I love the way the media writes about Christie missed his moment in 2012.
I didn't say that.
I know. I didn't say. I said media. I didn't say you. But I think first off, I had been governor at that time for about 15 months, coming off being a prosecutor for 7 years. I wasn't ready to be president. Now I know, given some of the presidents we've had since then, that this is a quaint idea. But
you mean lots of people who are unprepared running?
Yes, yeah. and I just believe that if you were going to ask people for their money and their vote, you had to believe in your heart you were ready to be president. And I think in 2011 I wasn't ready. So on the purely merits, I don't have any regrets. On the politics, I don't either. Now I was talking to a writer who recently wrote that same thing. Oh, he missed his moment, and talking about me then compared to Ron DeSantis now. And I said, what you were arguing for was the push for me to run came in September of 2011. I had been governor for 15 months, and I had no national organization, I had no national fundraising network, and I had no campaign set up, and the Iowa caucuses were in...
Sounds a lot like Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, no, but he had 100% name ID, right. So that helped. But in the Iowa caucuses were in 14 weeks. I don't know that that's like a huge opportunity politically that I missed, given that I would be running against Mitt Romney for the nomination, who had been running for president since 2006 and had all of those things in place. So we'd argue that. In terms of the changes in the country, they've been significant. Politically, if you look at where we were in 2012 and what was considered radical in 2012, 2012 looks like a period of extraordinary calm in America compared to where we are 12 years, 10 years later now, 11 years later. And I think the changes really happened in 2016. I think 2020, the only real political change that happened was COVID and the impact it had on that campaign, which I think permitted Joe Biden to have even more of an advantage in that race than he might have had otherwise against Donald Trump. And I'll explain that if you want me to. But I think 2016, none of us in that race took Donald Trump seriously. I mean, I can tell you that. So we had this establishment
until you endorsed him.
Well, yeah. Well, then he had beaten all of us, so that was pretty easy to do then. What people consider to be this establishment lane that contained me and Marco and Jeb and John Kasich. And okay, well, they're going to battle it out, and then one of them will take on Trump. Well, by the time we got done fighting with each other, Trump had already won the nomination, and he and his personality and his approach markedly changed politics on a national level in this country. So I think that's the single biggest thing that's happened, is that someone who had never held office before, but who had 100% name ID. Remember this, in American politics, in the TV age, which I'd say started in the early 50s, there have only been 2 candidates for president of the United States who weren't already president, who came into the race with 100% name ID. Donald Trump and Dwight Eisenhower, for 2 very different reasons. Eisenhower led the Allied forces to defeat evil in the world, and Donald Trump said, "You're fired," on national television. And so none of us understood how powerful that would be, that everyone knew who he was, and had an image of him that had been created, a fictional image of him created in a fake boardroom in New York City with TV cameras.
Is ABC News getting you up to that 100% name recognition?
Yeah, no, hardly. But it does okay. And I think most weeks I do more for ABC News than they do for me in terms of name ID, so it's okay. I think that's been the biggest change, is that Trump, in that time, changed the way people thought about how you run for president.
Right. We talk a lot about the Republican base and the Democratic base, but when it comes to the Republican base, is it substantially different today than it was in 2012, 2016?
I think that the most substantial difference is it's larger.
The base is larger.
Yeah, I think what Trump did was he brought people to vote in 2016 and then in 2020 who had not voted before, who had abandoned politics because they were disillusioned, or who had never engaged in politics because they hadn't been drawn in by whoever the candidates were. So I think what Trump did was he made the Republican Party larger. But when doing that, it's like when you make any endeavor larger, there's more human interaction, there's more conflict, and there's more disagreement.
Do you feel connected to that base? Does that base make you feel, comfortable, connected to them?
In part, yes, and in part, no. I mean, look, it's like anything else.
What parts no?
Well, I'm not nearly as angry as he seems to be, and that some members of his base seem to be, because I think that government is there to be an element of solving problems, addressing issues, not just as a protest. And I think that part of it I have a problem with. You know me. I mean, I have no problem arguing. I'm from New Jersey, for God's sake. I mean, being argumentative is taught in kindergarten and going forward as part of the required curriculum. But I always think arguments should be towards an end of solving something, not just to have the argument. And I think that your job as a political leader is, not to follow polls, but it's to change polls.
Right.
And the way you do that is by going out and making your argument. And some days you succeed and some days you don't. But that's the business of democracy, in my view. So I have no problem with the argument. It's the anger that's not directed towards fixing something. When Trump says, "I am your retribution." Well, I didn't ask you to be, thank you. And I'm not looking for a president to be my retribution. I'm looking for a president to be my inspiration.
Well, speaking of retribution and arguments, how about Ron DeSantis and Disney?
Well, there's so much there. So let's start off with this. I'm a conservative. I believe as a conservative, the job of government is in the main to stay out of the business of business. Like, I don't think we should be heavily regulating business. I don't think we should be telling business what to do, what to say, how to think. And I believe that's what conservatives have believed for as long as I've been alive. I don't think Ron DeSantis is a conservative based on his actions towards Disney. I mean, you know, where are we headed here now? That if you express disagreement in this country, the government is allowed to punish you? To me, that's what I always thought liberals did. And now all of a sudden, here we are participating in this with a Republican governor. And the second piece of it is, like, I'm all for the appropriate use of governmental power to achieve laudable goals. And when you're the governor of a state, and our governorship is constitutionally the most powerful governorship in the country. The New Jersey governorship has enormous authority. And I loved using the levers of that authority to be able to accomplish things. But when you put someone in that position, or like a position of president, if you're going to use those levers, you've got to look around the corners to see what the result of that'll be. For him to have taken the action he took against Disney, and to not have foreseen that Disney was going to do what they did in response, which was to completely take over the millions and millions of acres and the zoning decisions on that before they got the authority. Well, I'll tell you this much. That's not the guy I want sitting across from President Xi and negotiating our next agreement with China, or sitting across from Putin and trying to resolve what's happening in Ukraine, if you can't see around a corner that Bob Iger created for you. I mean, I don't think that's very imposing. And the last piece of what he said yesterday.
This is just for our audience online about building a prison next to Disneyland.
Or a competing amusement park,
right.
Or whatever. Look, sometimes in politics, you just have to admit when you screwed up and you got taken. It happens. It's hard to admit it because it happens to you on a public stage, and everybody gets to see your mistake. But if you're not used to that, then don't get in this business. You can go into private business and make your mistakes privately, and only the closest people to you will know. Now he's doubling down. I mean, you know, why do you want to punish a place that creates enormous tax revenue for your state, enormous tourism for your state, and you want to punish them because they disagreed with you? I mean, look, I think everyone should have the freedom in this country to disagree with something that government does. And my job as the leader is to convince a majority of the people in my state or my country that the criticism is wrong. Not to use the power of government that was given to me by the people to punish someone for that. And believe me, you'd hear Republicans speaking differently if the governor was Charlie Crist instead of Ron DeSantis, and the legislation Crist had put forward was perceived as being liberal legislation, and Disney spoke out and said, well, I think this is too liberal, and I think it's not in line with Disney's values. And Crist used the government to bang on Disney. Republicans all across the country would be going berserk and saying this is an overreach. Why? Because it's done by someone who's a Republican do we say this is okay? I think that's not a conservative position. I think he's wrong, and I think it rightfully makes a lot of people question his judgment and his maturity.
Is Donald Trump a conservative?
No.
That's
No.
not controversial, yeah.
No, he's not. I mean, look, does he have some conservative positions? Sure. But I've known Donald Trump for 22 years. And I'll tell you, when I was running for governor in 2009, I went to see Donald Trump to raise money. And he had been supportive of me. I'd known him when I was U.S. attorney. And he asked me what my position was on abortion. And I told him I was pro-life. And he goes, oh, for God's sake, Chris, you're not going to be able to win being pro-life. What do you care about that issue? Stay out of that issue. Don't get involved in it. This is now the guy who is extraordinary pro-life as president, and now seems to be unwilling to tell us what his view is about a number of these various abortion bills that are happening in the state.
We have all these different abortion standards now. I think now Florida's passed a 6-week ban,
Right.
and many other states have passed a 6-week ban. You were a Republican governor in what I consider to be a blue state.
Yeah.
So as you look at it, what are your insights on these, huge cultural identity issues and something as deep as abortion? Where are you on that?
Well,
compared to your party?
I'm pro-life. I have always believed in exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. And I believe that the conservative position we've taken for the last 50 years is the right one, which is this: the federal government should not be involved in this question. This should be determined by the 50 states. The issue of abortion is not in the Constitution, and the Constitution says if it's not explicitly said here, this power reverts to the states. And so I believe that that's the thing conservatives have been saying, Steve, and you know this, since Roe versus Wade.
But what conservatives are doing now is saying states' rights sometimes, but federalize
Not me.
a ban.
Not me.
So
I would not be for the federal government being involved in the issue of abortion in any way. I believe the states should make the decisions. And what's going to happen then is you're going to have different laws in different states. That happens every day on very important issues. That if you're in New Jersey, the law is one thing, but if you're in Oklahoma, it's something different. So let's use those two states as an example on this. In my home state of New Jersey now, with Phil Murphy as governor, one of the most liberal governors in America, abortion is legal up to the 9th month of pregnancy. In Oklahoma, with Kevin Stitt as governor, abortion is now outlawed. And guess what? Kevin Stitt got reelected by 13 points in Oklahoma after having signed that bill. And Phil Murphy got reelected by 3 points in New Jersey after re-signing that bill. People in states should be able to make this determination.
Well, Chris, what about if you've got a woman who goes across state lines and gets an abortion legally in a different state and then returns to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and all of a sudden is facing, I don't know what the Oklahoma statutes are, but if there were some that criminalized that act and action, is that something you could support?
I think each state's got to determine what they want their laws to be, and the people in those states have to decide how they want to fight it or not fight it. And so I think that's the right position, is that states should be able to make this determination. And I think it's inconsistent for us as a party to say we're against federal control unless federal control could work to our advantage, and it supports our position. My position has always been, it was wrong for the Supreme Court to get involved in 1973, and they should have let each state make their own determination. And I believe we would have evolved more quickly to where we are now if they had stayed out of it. Because attitudes and norms and science and all these things have helped to inform these opinions on both sides of that issue. And on the other, you talk about other social issues. I just think we need to be honest with each other and to acknowledge reality. And I think too much of what we're talking about, we were talking a little bit about this backstage, was that, facts have become negotiable. And we seek the facts we want to hear. So I have my 90-year-old father, who's always been a pretty conservative guy, and he never turns off Fox News. It's like the background music of his life. He's watching it all the time. And then I have a sister-in-law who is in her 60s and is very liberal, and she's watching MSNBC all day, and she never watched anything else.
Right.
And so these outlets now play to that reality. I think the truth matters, and I think we need to tell the truth, even if we're going to be telling a truth that's going to make some people unhappy, uncomfortable.
So speaking of telling the truth and Fox News, I'm sure you read some of the interesting texts and tweets from Tucker Carlson and other Fox News hosts who were on the verge potentially of this Dominion lawsuit, Fox News thing going forward or being settled. Who knows? I don't know what the latest is right now. But it does raise an interesting question about the news industry and ethics in the news industry, and whether or not we are playing a public role and function. And I say we broadly, in this. What should be done given what you've seen in some of the texts in Fox News of people broadcasting, saying things that were completely antithetically different than what they had privately communicated to their colleagues?
I think what should happen is what is happening, right? We have laws in this country, and people have access to the civil justice system. And if they think they've been wronged, I think what's happening in Delaware right now shows that the civil justice system in this country works. Here's Dominion, which is, at its best day, slightly less than $1 billion company, who is taking on one of the most powerful media conglomerates in the world. When you look at everything that Rupert and his family own, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And and they've brought them into a courtroom in Delaware, forced them to disclose things that we otherwise wouldn't have known, and are now holding them to account. And if they come to a settlement in the next couple of days, that's Dominion's decision, right? If they believe that's what represents justice to them. But I think the laws need to apply to everyone, and everyone needs to be held to account in front of a court in this country based on the conduct if someone brings them in a civil matter to court. And I suspect that if the defendant here was MSNBC or CNN, that we might have found similar type of text messages or emails about the contradiction between what they think their audience wants to hear and what the truth is, and how they decide to present that. And I think that the ultimate result of all this should be for us to have a reassessment of what news is. And my kids make fun of me all the time that I'm a dinosaur because we still get newspapers at the bottom of the driveway. And I get 3 newspapers every day and read through newspapers every day. The Wall Street Journal, because I want to know what we're thinking. The New York Times, because I want to know what they're thinking. And the New York Post, because it's just fun. Right? And so, and I feel like when I get done reading those 3 newspapers every day, I have a fairly well-rounded view of it. And I think unless you do stuff like that, whether it's, you consume your news online or whether you consume it, electronically on a television, I think, I say to my father all the time, watch CNN every once in a while. Watch MSNBC every once in a while. Get to understand how people look at these things differently. It may not change his point of view,
right?
But at least it informs his point of view a little bit more. And I think, given the atmosphere we're in right now, and now we have outlets like yours and others that are trying to present this in a much different way, in a much more thoughtful way.
Thank you for reading Principles.
Well,
Principles.
I'm not stupid.
At least I tell people I don't care if you read it, just to open it. No,
Make sure
Justin Smith, our CEO, is there. I do care if you read it, but opening it helps nonetheless.
That's right.
But Chris, you were a public prosecutor. You successfully prosecuted Jared Kushner's dad. You took on, who was a public official, and you took on a lot of public officials. Would you have brought the case and gone for an indictment like the case that Alvin Bragg had against Donald Trump, if you were in those shoes, given what you know? No, because, look, our system in the United States differs from the system in Europe in one very fundamental way. Right.
We give prosecutors discretion. In Europe, if a crime has been committed and you have evidence that a crime has been committed, you are compelled to bring the case as a prosecutor. In the United States, we granted prosecutorial discretion, that you can look at the various law enforcement challenges that are in front of a prosecutor, and he or she can decide, where do I want to spend my resources? Now, I go to Manhattan a couple of times, 3 times a week. With the crime that's happening in Manhattan, the idea that he would divert any resources from taking violent criminals off the street and making the streets safer to go after a 7-year-old hush money payment to a porn star, how that improves the quality of life for the people of Manhattan, I don't know. But I will also say this, that you can say 2 things at the same time. That as a prosecutor, I wouldn't have brought the prosecution Alvin Bragg brought, because I don't think he's going to win it, and I don't think it's worthy of the challenges that are before him. But at the same time, if you have someone who has had an affair with a porn star, paid her off $130,000 to cover it up, to keep that information from the American people while he's seeking the highest office in the land, that's not the character of somebody who I think should be president of the United States. And I think you can believe both things at the same time. We don't need to criminalize it to condemn it. You can say, this isn't a crime.
Does it bother you that not a lot of Republicans seem to be condemning it?
Yes. And that's why I am. Because to me, it's pretty obvious. That's not the character we want in someone who's going to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office. And you can take that position while also saying, but he shouldn't be being prosecuted in a Manhattan courtroom for it.
Right.
He should be prosecuted in the court of public opinion for it. And he should be held to account that way for it. But what we have now is a system where, because people in my party are unwilling to say that, and because people in the Democratic Party are like hanging from the highest yardarm for that.
Right.
But these, by the way, were the same people who did not think it was an impeachable offense for Bill Clinton to have lied about having sex with Monica Lewinsky in the White House, because that was a personal matter that involved his personal conduct and shouldn't have been prosecuted. Well, the bullshit hypocrisy exists on both sides, Steve. And so my view on this is, it is bad conduct that should be punished in the public square, but it is not a crime.
Right.
The worst part of it is that it places a diminishment upon the other two investigations that are going on.
Well, I was going to ask you, Fulton County, Georgia, Jack Smith, investigations both into January 6th and management of apparently nuclear secrets and other, big secrets. There's a lot we don't know about those cases,
Right.
but are those, if you were, again, online, would you be chasing investigations into those if you were in charge and going after a public official?
I'd certainly be
You don't see that as weaponization of the FBI?
No,
or
when
the
you
investigative
become a
authorities?
public official, it doesn't make you immune from the laws of the country. Only Nixon thought that. When the president does it, it's not illegal, right? I mean, no, you should be investigating it. But I had some very specific rules when I was U.S. attorney, and I think it was one of the reasons why I was 130-0 in public official prosecutions in my 7 years. That tells you two things: we were really good at it, and there's so much great crime in New Jersey. Like, you get to 130 public official prosecutions in 7 years. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But we had two rules. One, I would never authorize a search warrant against a public official unless we already had enough evidence to prosecute him or her. Because once you execute a search warrant on somebody, the public believes they're guilty. They just do. And that's toothpaste you can't put back in the tube if you wind up not bringing the case. So I used to say to my prosecutors, don't come to me with a search warrant until you also come to me with the evidence that already shows me that beyond a reasonable doubt the person is guilty. Secondly, my view on prosecuting public officials was, it better be a shot right between the eyes. I am not bringing marginal cases against public officials, because when you bring the case, it decays the public confidence in government. If you're going to do that, you better make sure they're guilty. Don't be going off on some wild goose chase. So I hope that what the Fulton County DA does and what Jack Smith does at DOJ is to follow that idea. Because bringing a criminal case about whether it's the classified documents and obstruction of justice or the post-election period in 2020 against a former president of the United States is an extraordinarily serious attack on our government.
So
you better do it.
I want to get to some questions in the audience, but short form, Marjorie Taylor Greene has called for defunding the FBI. Do you support that notion?
Stupid. Next.
Jim Jordan has a committee investigating the weaponization of government. Do you believe government has been weaponized against
I do think in
particular
some instances it has been. I think it was weaponized against me in the Obama Justice Department. Look, I don't believe it's any coincidence that I was reelected in 2013 with 61% of the vote, that there were polls after that that showed me beating Hillary Clinton, and that in 2014, right thereafter, the Obama Justice Department brought an investigation against my administration that they had last for years, that the Supreme Court wound up dismissing 9-0 because they said there was no basis, in fact, to bring a criminal prosecution. Don't think that the weaponization of government hasn't happened. It has.
Right.
And I think that Congress exercising appropriate oversight, and I use the word appropriate before oversight, and I hope that's what Congressman Jordan does, because I do think that there are elements inside the Justice Department going back to the Obama administration and forward that have politicized the Department of Justice. And having been an alum of the Department of Justice during a moment which I think was one of the best in our recent history, which is the immediate post 9/11 period, when all of us who were U.S. attorneys were challenged by the President of the United States to make sure that another attack on the United States was not going to happen. And we did our jobs and made sure that it wasn't. It saddens me when I see the politicization of the Justice Department. And I think whoever the next president is, job one is going to be to pick an attorney general who restores the trust and integrity of that, and a president who doesn't monkey around like Trump did or tried to do in criminal investigations, which diminishes people's confidence in a fair justice system.
Chris, we seem to have two major epidemics underway that we sort of respond to after tragedy. And you and I talked at length after George Floyd's murder about police training and behavior and public trust and what you did in Camden and other places. But, you know, when you sort of look at both the rash of mass killings in this country, but you also see like Tyree Nichols and others who were victims of clear police brutality and abuse. Where are you and where is the Republican Party on any credible response on those two epidemics?
Well, I'm going to answer for the party. I'll just answer for myself.
But you want to lead the party.
Well, then, yeah. if I do, then my answer will be the party's position.
Okay, good.
Right? So we'll see. But look, I think that, let's take the George Floyd and other police abuse cases. I think there is a way for leaders to work with police in this country to teach them how to deal with these issues. You brought up Camden. In Camden, New Jersey, when I became governor, it was the most dangerous city in America. And I tried to work with the police force there. They were not responsive to my concerns. So I did what any good New Jerseyan would do. I fired the entire Camden City Police Department and hired a new one with 125 more police officers for the same that I was paying. Got 425 for the same I was paying 300. But just as importantly, what we did was set up a whole new regime of training that emphasized three things. One was community policing. We got them in the main out of cars, put them on bicycles and on foot. I wanted the citizens in Camden, who were 95% African American and Hispanic, to see their police officers, to look them in the eye, to get to know them as people. Second, we taught them violence de-escalation. And there's a method to this. Mm-hmm. To not escalate the violence when someone's committing a crime, whether it's a petty crime or a serious one, but to de-escalate the violence. And third, we required them to be involved in other community activities, police athletic leagues, other things that would get them to be seen as real people to the folks in Camden. What's happened now in the 10 years since we made those reforms? The murder rate in Camden is down 85%. And when George Floyd happened, in a city that's 95% minority, you know what happened? They had a march in Camden that was led by the African-American pastor of the largest church in Camden and the Polish-American white police chief. They stood at the front of the parade together and marched through Camden protesting what happened with George Floyd. And so, to me, that is the way you have to go about this across the entire country, is the police officers are not the enemy here, but they're placed into a situation of violence in this country where we don't give them the tools they need to be able to effectively do it. And then we have to have appropriate punishment, as I think was meted out in the George Floyd case, for those people who, despite whatever training you give them, go off the rails. And they do, just like happens in every other industry in the world. And so those people have to be punished appropriately.
Real quick, you may remember I ran into you and Senator Susan Collins and Senator Joe Manchin huddled over a table on the second floor of Willard Hiding. And,
yes.
And were you conspiring on something fun? Were you launching, thinking of a new political party? I mean,
no, we're not thinking of a new political party. But look, Joe and Susan are friends of mine. Joe Manchin was my mentor governor. When I got elected in 2009, the NGA assigned you a mentor governor. My mentor governor was Joe Manchin for my whole first year of 2010 until he appointed himself to the United States Senate and left. So we're great friends. And what we were conspiring about that morning was the issue of bipartisanship. And how do we lower the temperature? And they wanted to come to my Policy Institute in New Jersey and talking, both of them, about that issue. And so that's what we were conspiring about that morning, was that how can we begin to have more of a conversation in this country about folks being my political adversary, not my political enemy.
If Manchin wanted to run for president, is there a pathway?
No.
Have you told him that?
He hasn't asked. But I guess I just did.
Richard Goodstein.
Governor, you've indicated that Trump on January 6th, and even using the January 6th choir at a rally, was kind of like the last straw for you. But in the 2016 and 2020 presidential debates, Trump said, if I lose, it's because it was rigged. So we had notice. And you supported him after that, and after Charlottesville, and after he picked Putin over his own intelligence agencies, and after he used the Justice Department in ways that you wouldn't have tolerated as a U.S. attorney, and after he called Raffensperger and said, find 11,780 votes, and after the fake elector scheme was public. All that happened before January 6th. The question is, why should voters, Republican voters and the primary voters generally, think that only now you've seen the light, that his character now is evident that it wasn't as of Election Day 2016?
Well, I'm happy to answer that, but also to correct your facts. The line was crossed for me on election night 2020. And I said it on ABC, and you can go back and look at the tape at 2:30 in the morning, on the morning after the election, after the president was done giving his speech where he said the election was stolen. I turned to George Stephanopoulos as the speech was going on, and I said, come to me first. And he said to me, why? I said, don't worry, I won't disappoint you. And George came to me, and I said, that is beneath the office that he's held. You cannot stand up there and say this election was stolen when you have absolutely no facts to support it. And, you know, I cannot be supportive of this. So I've been speaking out against what he's done, not January 6th, but November 6th. And to me, if you have the privilege of being elected president of the United States, which he had, to then undercut the system that put you there with lies, which is what they are, the election wasn't stolen, he lost. Now, I understand why he has a hard time coming to terms with losing to Joe Biden. I mean, he's the only person outside the state of Delaware who's ever lost to Joe Biden. So I understand why he's upset about that. But the fact is, he lost. And so, to me, that's where the line was crossed. Remember, too, about all the things that you mentioned. I remember speaking to David Cameron when he was getting ready to run for re-election in Great Britain. And while I was governor, and I was over there visiting him, and he said to me, I don't understand your system. He goes, for God's sake, our elections are 48 days long. He said, this was 2015. He goes, right. You're already running, and you're going to be running for 2 years. To explain the system to me. And I said, Mr. Prime Minister, remember something. In America, we don't get to vote for who we want to vote for. We get to vote for who's left. And so when anybody's ever critical of my support of Donald Trump, I tell them, well, I made the decision that I didn't want Hillary Clinton to be president of the United States. You can agree or disagree with that, but my only two choices were those two. And let me say this, it's not like I supported him from the beginning. I ran against him. I didn't think he was the best choice for president. I thought I was, but that didn't work out. So then we're left with a choice. And I think the American people were disgruntled with that choice. Wasn't the choice I wanted. But if you're going to participate in the democracy, you got to make a choice. I think sitting out is not an option. And the last thing I'd say on that is that about his things talking about if I lose, it's going to be rigged. Well, anybody who knows Donald Trump knows he's been saying that forever. There's a difference between spinning politically to try to put yourself in a better position before the vote happens and after the vote happens saying it was rigged. To me, those are two very, very different things, because then you're saying, because the American people look at that, a lot of them, and say, well, he's president, he must know something, or he wouldn't say that. He knew nothing.
Let's get Finn Gomez, political director of CBS News.
Good morning, Governor, and thank you, Steve, for having this. On 2024, you said you were going to be making a decision in the next couple of weeks, by May. One question, sir, I have a couple, if that's okay. Very quick ones, Steve. One is, what would be your early state strategy? Which early state do you believe you would be able to win? Two, what would hold you back from running? And would part of that be the 2016 dynamic that we saw when there were quite a few people running, and then there was that 25% to 30% that were backing Trump the entire time? Is there concern that that obstacle could happen again this time around?
I'll answer those backwards. No, that would not hold me back from running because I think that analysis is a retrospective analysis. And every time you look at the next election through the prism of the last one, the one thing I can guarantee you for sure is you're wrong. That dynamic is completely different this time. Remember in 2016, no one knew who Donald Trump was going to be as a political figure. We just knew him as a public figure and a TV star. The whole evaluation of what percentage of the vote he has. I love people, and we're sitting here in Gallup, who say they know what percentage of the vote he has. They have no friggin' idea what percentage of the vote he's going to have when we go to Iowa or New Hampshire or Nevada or South Carolina. Because there's, for what Steve was laying out, there's so many things that are going to happen between now and then, you have no idea of it. And I bet you this race will be no more than 7 or 8 people when it finishes out. And that is less than half of the number that ran in 16. And we're on the ballot in New Hampshire. We have 15 on the ballot in New Hampshire. So I don't worry about it. What personal thing would get me to stop myself from running? If I concluded at the end of this, period of consideration that I couldn't win, I wouldn't run. I don't want to run for president again for the experience. I've already had the experience. It was a lot of fun at some moments and not so much at others. But I wouldn't do that. And look, I think in terms of early state strategy, I'm not worried about any of that stuff yet. Look, at the end of the day, politics is a human activity, and because of that, it's dynamic. And I don't know which way that'll work, but what I can tell you for sure is that if I get into the race, I'll make it interesting.
One quick question here, and then Jim, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hey, Governor. Question about your speaking to truth and the need to call out bullshit, hypocrisy. How would you react to the Republican Party leadership's recent reactions to ProPublica's investigation of Clarence Thomas and the non-disclosures there?
Well, as someone who's been subject to ethics rules, what I expect of everyone is for them to comply with the rules. I've read the ProPublica stuff. I think some of it's interesting, and I think some of it's crap. And I think, whenever I read a piece from a group like them filled with adjectives, every adjective they put in there tells me that's a place where they didn't have a fact to put in. So here's what I'd say.
This is the ProPublica piece?
Yeah, the ProPublica piece is now on Justice Thomas. The facts are that the Supreme Court hasn't been covered by any specific ethics rules for almost its entire existence. And you can argue whether that's right or it's wrong, but I don't think that much of what they wrote, to me, made me lose confidence in Justice Thomas. On the other hand, I do think that the smart thing for the Chief Justice to do, and the members of the court, would be to subject themselves to some rules and disclosure that would give people greater public confidence. But do I want Congress doing that? Hell no, man. Look at how they comply with their ethics rules and their ethics process. They doth protest too much. And so I don't think I want the United States Congress being the arbiter of ethics for the United States Supreme Court. We have enough problems in Congress. They should deal with some other stuff.
We're right near the end, but I'm going to bring these last two in real fast. Yes.
Kit
Tell us who you are.
Hey, I'm Kit Maher with CNN. Recently in New Hampshire, you said that Republicans need someone on the debate stage who can go after Trump like you did Senator Marco Rubio. I'm wondering, do you see yourself as that person? And if not, which potential candidate do you think can go after him?
I guess we'll see, right? I mean, it's if I decide to get in. Look, if I decide to get in, I think everybody who has watched me publicly over the last 13 years knows that I won't be a wallflower. And I think you've seen that this morning. If I've got something to say, I'm going to say it. And so if it turns out that I'm on a debate stage in August of this year and Donald Trump decides to be on it, you can be sure that we'll have some exchanges that I hope will be illuminating to the public about both him and me. But I'm not going to evaluate the other folks' ability to debate or not debate. I think the best thing that happened in 2016 in that debate in New Hampshire was that it shows what debates are when they're at their best. They're spontaneous, they're non-scripted, and so it shines a light on your ability to think and to reason. And that's what happens when you're sitting behind the desk in an executive governmental position. It's not scripted most of the time, and you got to react. And the ability to be able to do that intelligently and effectively is, I think, one of the factors that marks the difference between a good governor or president and one not so good.
If you don't run, is there anybody in the potential field you like?
Well, I like a lot of the people in the field. Like, I like Tim Scott a lot. I've always had a great relationship with Mike Pence. And I've had a good relationship with Nikki Haley. So there are people I like. I mean, I'll support them. Look, but the thing you know about me too, Steve, is I'm not a sit on the sidelines type of guy. Going back to your question, I feel like I have an obligation to be involved and express my opinions in this democracy. It's not a spectator sport, so I probably would support someone, but I don't know who.
Let me give the last question to Jim Clifton, the chairman of Gallup.
Governor, if you run, the first question is going to be about abortion. What's your answer?
It's going to be about what?
I say the first question that you're going to be asked is about abortion. What will your answer be?
My answer is what I said this morning, which is I think each state should make the decision either through their governor, their state legislatures, or a vote of their people. And they should decide what they want the law on abortion to be in their particular state. That's the way the founders set it up. If the founders wanted an issue like that to be in the Constitution, they would have wrote it in. They didn't. And what they said specifically about that was the amendment that states any powers not given explicitly to the federal government in this document revert to the states. Well, whether you want to call it privacy or right to, making your decisions on medical care, however you want to determine and phrase that issue, it's not in the Constitution. And if it's not, then that's for the states to decide. State governments, having run one for 8 years, are not there just to be adornments to the federal government. We're there to do most of the work. That's the way the founders set it up. And this bigger and bigger and bigger federal government is not only bad for taxpayers, it's a threat to freedom and liberty. Let most of the governing occur as close to the people as they possibly can. And when I was governor, what I tried to do was push as much of the decision-making down to local governments as I could, because you see your mayor in the dry cleaners.
Right.
And you could say to her, hey, I don't like you're doing this or that. The chance they're going to see me is slim. The chance they're going to see Joe Biden is non-existent. So let's make government go as close to the people as it can. And on the abortion issue, let the states make that decision and try to impact the debate in your state however you think it should go.
Two quickies. One, when you were, after Donald Trump was elected, you put a lot of time and effort to thinking about what kinds of expertise could staff the government. And you created binders and profiles and rationale, and that went into the trash.
Literally.
So my question is, are you fearful, should the nation be fearful of what a return of Donald Trump would mean to public service, to positions? There's been a lot of discussion of Schedule F employees and kind of going further down into those who serve the government in non-political ways, or allegedly non-political ways. And are you worried about that?
I'm worried that he said, I am your retribution. I'm more worried about that than anything. Because I know two things for sure about that statement. He's not going to be our retribution. He's going to be his retribution. And I think that anybody who puts their own desires, emotions as president ahead of the good of the country doesn't belong in the job. No one in this country asked him to be their retribution. And like I said before, I think a president should be our inspiration, not our retribution. And that's the challenge for the next president, is to try to inspire this country to be something better. And going back to your question, if I run, it's a risk. It's a huge risk.
Right.
I know I'm not the polling favorite at the moment, but it's a risk worth taking if you really believe you have a chance to get there, because this country is worth risking things for.
Right.
And so to me, what I worry about is people who believe differently than our founders believed. Yeah. We our fortunes, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Right.
That's what they were willing to put forward to establish this country, and they did. And I look back on them and think to myself, I'm not going to be part of the generation that says, yeah, not worth my time, not worth the risk. If they felt that way, you know, we'd be going to the coronation on May 6th.
And finally, and this will either be a feel-good question or it's going to make you feel really bad. I don't know.
Okay.
But I interviewed the governor during COVID, and you and your wife, Mary Pat, set up this fund to help small companies. I think was called like Red Crow or Red.
The 30-day fund.
Yeah, the 30-day fund to help folks through this. I'm just interested in those companies, those small firms, businesses that you were helping out make it. I've always interested in going back. Did they make it?
2/3 of the companies that we supported survived. And we were incredibly gratified by that. We started off.
What was your favorite one? I was one that you.
Gosh, there's this great. This I probably shouldn't say, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's this great bakery in Newark. That was right. You know, but I'm going to say it because it is my favorite one. There's this great bakery in Newark, started by a husband and wife, who were providing like fresh baked goods in inner city Newark. And they started, it took an enormous risk, and then COVID hit. And one of our favorites, my favorite, one of Mary Pat's favorites, was that. But I mean, I've gone to places that I forgot we helped.
Right.
Like I walked into a diner in Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey, and we gave them all certificates along with money. And that certificate, as of last summer, was still hanging on the wall, that they were a 30-day fund company, helped by me and Mary Pat. And we started by putting $100,000 of our own money into the fund. And then Mary Pat and I went out and raised an additional $1.5 million from bigger corporations and individual donors, and then gave that money out in grants to those people. And the idea was, we'll give you enough money to keep you going for 30 days. Because back then, remember, this was like, 30 days to stop the spread, right? You know, it turned out to be a little bit longer than that, but that was the world we were living in at the time.
No, I remember there were great companies. Well, that sounds like a good.
They were great, and those folks are still working and still doing what they're doing, and they were great. They are a great couple, and we were really happy to help them.
All right, well, take me to the bakery sometime.
You know I know where it is, so no problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Great to see you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.